There are lots of reasons why a movie might not make it to theaters. Maybe they couldn't find distribution, or the plan from the start was an at-home release, or perhaps it was a quality issue.
Sometimes a movie performs so poorly and becomes so poisoned by terrible word of mouth that studios or distributors will pull it out of theaters abruptly to end the embarrassment. Check out this roundup of box office disasters because you probably didn't see them in theaters. Hollywood makes so many movies out of familiar properties because name recognition equals free marketing. It's much easier to get filmgoers on board with something they already know than to sell them on a new concept. That's how G.I. Joe and Transformers became successful movie franchises. Ironically, though, another fondly remembered cartoon show and toy line from the 80s became one of the biggest film flops of all time. Jem and the Holograms, a live-action, modernized version of the property about an all-female rock band, opened in October 2015 in more than 2,400 theaters. But the filmmakers didn't stay true to the source material, thus alienating the only people who'd actually want to go see it. The result was an abysmal rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an opening weekend of just $1.37 million. In week 2, revenues dropped to a mere $388,000. And that's when Universal pulled it out of theaters completely and pretended it never even existed.
We were just talking about you.
Yeah, we know. We heard everything.
Inspired by the interactive audiences of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, screenwriter Ken Visselman conceived of a film where kids were encouraged to yell out their thoughts to the characters on screen. The result was the Oogieloves in the Big Balloon Adventure, which was mostly a generic kids movie with some brightly colored characters named Gooby, Zuzi, and Toofy. Plus, there were special appearances from stars kids love, like Cloris Leachman and Toni Braxton. Parents had little interest in paying for their kids to yell at a screen for 90 minutes when they could do that at home for free. During its first weekend, the Oogieloves earned just $448,131 at over 2,000 theaters. Accounting for multiple showings at each location, that works out to an average of about 2 people per screening. It somehow did even worse in its next 2 weekends before the marketing visionaries at Ken Visselman Presents mercifully removed it.
Oogieloves! Oogieloves!
In June 2015, a movie with the generic and bland title of United Passions hit theaters. It's a mawkish story of the rise and greatness of FIFA, the universally reviled worldwide governing body of soccer. It's so extremely pro-FIFA that it's no surprise the organization provided most of the film's $22 million budget. It's a bad movie on its own merits, but it also fell victim to extremely bad timing. Its release came just days after the arrests and indictments of more than a dozen FIFA executives on corruption charges and the resignation of FIFA president Sepp Blatter. The director publicly regretted having made the film and even called it propaganda. United Passions played to 10 theaters in the United States, where it earned a grand total of $918. It then dispassionately disunified with theaters after just 1 week. Released in August 1981, Honky Tonk Freeway is a pleasant enough ensemble comedy that seems tailor-made to run on a low-wattage local TV station on a Sunday afternoon. It's about a small Florida tourist trap of a town named T-Claw that's home to a small zoo and a water-skiing elephant. The mayor bribes a state official to ensure that a new freeway will include an off-ramp to T-Claw, thus vastly improving the town's fortunes. The off-ramp doesn't get built, so the residents come together to paint the whole town pink as a publicity stunt. All of that non-action is intercut with the stories of various individuals about to wind up in T-Claw, including bank robbers, hitchhikers, a family, and some nuns. Directed by Academy Award winner John Schlesinger, this whole affair somehow cost $24 million, $6 million more than The Empire Strikes Back. The total box office haul of Honky Tonk Freeway was just over $2 million. It was gone from theaters without a trace within a few weeks. In the 2000s, Uwe Boll carved a niche in the film industry as the go-to guy to turn video games into movies. Even when he lucked into working with great actors, the results remained unimpressive. Efforts like Blood Rain and Alone in the Dark contributed heavily to the universally acknowledged notion that video game movies are always terrible. But one that rises above, or sinks below, the rest is Postal. This 2007 flick took the kill-em-all action of the Postal games and added a plot in which the guy who played Farkas in A Christmas Story is the title Postal dude. The film includes dozens of gruesome deaths, Bull playing himself getting shot in the groin, and a supposedly comic scene lampooning the events of 9/11, not shown here. While that all seems like the plot of a direct-to-video movie or possibly a fever-induced nightmare, Postal somehow got itself a wide theatrical release scheduled for May 2008. But just before its release, nearly all of the distributors that had lined up pulled out. Rather than open on 1,500 screens, it opened on 4. That's right, Postal was so bad that it got pulled out of theaters before it even arrived. Had Gigli not starred 2 of the biggest celebrities of the era, who were in a high-profile romance at the time, it would have been just a weird and forgettable movie, not a legendary flop. Ben Affleck plays a stereotypical gangster goon with an unpronounceable name assigned to kidnap the Baywatch-obsessed, developmentally disabled brother of a federal prosecutor. Things go awry, so the bosses send in a more capable operative, Ricky, played by Jennifer Lopez. Then the two fall in love, even though Ricky is gay and Gigli is a raging misogynist. That plot and the off-screen Bennifer antics led to an unofficial competition among critics over who could say the meanest things in their reviews. The Wall Street Journal called it the worst movie. All right, the worst allegedly major movie of our admittedly young century. Somehow, Gigli cost $54 million to make, but it unsurprisingly bombed, bringing in just $6 million. After 3 weeks in theaters, it moved to its final resting place in the grocery store DVD bargain bins. Madonna is certainly one of the greatest and most influential pop stars of all time, but that goodwill has very little to do with her forays into acting. She's basically the Meryl Streep of the Razzie Awards. The Oscars of bad movies have dishonored Madonna a remarkable 16 times for stinkers like Shanghai Surprise, Body of Evidence, and Swept Away. The last one seemed like it might be a little better than the usual Madonna movie, as it was written and directed by Guy Ritchie. He's the acclaimed filmmaker behind Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, who also happened to be Madonna's husband at the time. That didn't seem to do much good, however. The desert island rom-com suffered a critical drubbing and took home 4 Razzies. Audiences didn't like it either. It played in American theaters for 3 weekends to a total of less than $600,000 before the distributor swept it away. In the late 2000s, a science fiction allegory about respecting nature and the dangers of colonialism hit theaters. It utilized cutting-edge CGI and animation technology to render lifelike but exotic humanoid creatures. But we're not actually talking about Avatar, which pulled in a record $2.7 billion at the worldwide box office and played to packed movie theaters for months on end. Nope. This is the story of Delgo, a movie at the other end of the box office spectrum. With the protagonists fleeing their resource-ravaged homeland for another, this 2008 animated feature bore a similar look and premise to Avatar, but it had far from the same success. Made by the small Fathom Studios, development began in 1999, when CGI animation was still something of a novelty. By the time of its release in 2008, Delgo's style was old hat and not particularly well executed. Plus, its lead voice actors, Freddie Prinze Jr. and Jennifer Love Hewitt, had lost their A-list status. While Avatar broke just about every box office record, Delgo broke one too. It earned $511,000 at 2,160 theaters during its first weekend. Bad enough to make it the worst wide-release opening weekend ever at the time. It doesn't rank among the worst second weekends of all time, though, because Freestyle Releasing yanked Delgo out of theaters just 7 days after its release.
Awkward androgyny, annoying American Idols, and the unsuccessful Undead. All of these things have spelled box office poison so severe that movies were prematurely pulled from theaters. There have been many movies based on Saturday Night Live sketches, some of which have been very critically and commercially successful, like Wayne's World or The Blues Brothers. However, many of them have been box office disappointments, and maybe the worst was 1994's It's Pat, centered on Julia Sweeney's androgynous character from her early 90s tenure on the sketch show.
What can I say? I'm a very sexual being.
The movie follows Pat's romantic relationship with the similarly genderless Chris, played by Dave Foley, while their neighbor Kyle, played by Charles Rocket, resolved to figure out the character's gender once and for all. None of the one-note jokes translated well to the big screen, and as of June 2024, the film has a rare 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Fortunately, the film didn't have much of a presence theatrically to be pulled from in the first place. Its Pat only opened in 33 theaters across the country, raking in just under $61,000 during its opening weekend before being dropped. Sweeney later appeared on Showtime's Work in Progress and expressed regrets over playing the problematic character.
I feel terrible. I didn't mean it to be mean. I think I was really naive. I think I was, but now I'm like, ugh.
Winning American Idol during its first season was a career maker for Kelly Clarkson, who went on to become not just a successful pop artist, but also a daytime talk show host. That career trajectory wasn't without its bumps though, and one of the biggest bumps was from Justin to Kelly, a musical rom-com in which she co-stars alongside American Idol runner-up Justin Guarini. Clarkson was opposed to starring in the movie, knowing from the start that it wasn't going to work. She told Us Weekly, "I cried for a solid hour on the phone with the creator of American Idol and pleaded to be let out of the contract."
No, I didn't think I'd be doing a movie, no.
Clarkson's instincts were right, as the film only grossed $2.7 million on its opening weekend, against a budget of $14 million, and lasted just 2 weekends before nearly 2,000 theaters pulled it from their rotation. Critics weren't exactly positive about the film when it was released in 2003, just as Clarkson had expected. As Time magazine wrote about the film, in the most generous light, it is the worst film so far this century. Nicolas Cage is no stranger to starring in critically panned films, with two of the most noteworthy examples being Ghost Rider and The Wicker Man.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Open my eyes!
However, the 2011 action flick Seeking Justice is one of the lesser-known Cage bombs, likely due to its limited time at the box office, grossing just under $250,000 in its opening weekend and getting pulled from theaters within 3 weeks. It's a strange premise that never pans out. Cage plays Will, an English teacher whose wife is brutally assaulted one night, resulting in Will enlisting a hitman's clandestine group to hunt down his wife's attacker. In his 1.5-star review, Roger Ebert's only commendation for the film was to praise Cage's acting, but saying that the rest of the movie was made up of preposterous scenes, pointing to the confusing logic of how this secret organization worked. While Seeking Justice may not be Nicolas Cage's most outlandish role ever, its short time in the theaters made it one of his most forgettable. Director Robert Luketic has pumped out some major hits, with his most notable projects including the 2001 comedy Legally Blonde and the heist flick 21. However, his 2013 thriller Paranoia wasn't his most inspired project, according to critics. The film's all-star cast includes Liam Hemsworth in one of his first starring roles as Adam, a corporate inventor turned spy. The New York Times called out his performance, saying, "He ambles through the role like an obedient robot." They also compared the film's direction to a deluxe perfume commercial, but Variety expected more from its theatrical results, writing, "Indifferently made and nearly tension-free, this Liam Hemsworth starrer should generate a moderate opening weekend box office. After that, it would be well advised to look over its shoulder." The filmmakers would have probably killed for a moderate opening weekend compared to what it got. Against its whopping $35 million budget, Paranoia only grossed $3 million in its first weekend, before getting pulled from over 2,000 theaters after its second weekend. Ultimately, it made just $17 million worldwide, still under half of its budget, making it one of the biggest box office bombs of 2013. David Koepp is one of the most successful screenwriters of all time, having penned films like Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man and the first Mission Impossible movie. However, his stints behind the camera have been less successful, with the most infamous example being Mortdecai, starring Johnny Depp as a corrupt art dealer in extreme debt who turns to theft, putting him in the crosshairs of law enforcement. In a review for The Hollywood Reporter, Mortdecai was described as stuffed with star names and classic farce ingredients, but its fatal flaw is an almost surreal lack of jokes. It's ultimately a frightful, crashing bore.
Steady yourself.
Its opening weekend gross of $4 million might not sound like much of a failure until you look at the film's astronomical $60 million budget. It ultimately made back less than $50 million in its worldwide theatrical run. Its domestic theatrical run, at the very least, didn't last long. Mortdecai was pulled from 2,000 theaters after its second weekend, and had disappeared from all others by President's Day weekend of 2015. Director Michael Mann's impressive repertoire includes iconic films like Heat, one of the best crime movies of all time, and more recently the Adam Driver-led Ferrari. However, his 2015 thriller Blackhat was one of that year's biggest box office disasters, making just below $20 million throughout its entire theatrical run against a budget of $70 million. It was dropped from nearly 2,500 theaters after its second weekend, remaining in theaters for just 3 weekends in total. Reviews were divisive. The Los Angeles Times praised Mann's direction, but questioned the casting of Chris Hemsworth as a hacker recruited by the FBI to assist in the capture of a cyber terrorist, saying, "The sullen cast he gives to the role testifies to his lack of comfort as much as anything else." Other reviewers felt it would be unmemorable in comparison with the rest of Mann's career, though Mann felt the film's failure was due to a lack of preparation. While some critics liked Blackhat enough to put it on their year-end lists, its failure at the box office was ultimately blamed on poor marketing strategy, as well as box office competition with American Sniper. Its negative reception also led to its Australian theatrical release being cancelled by Legendary Pictures, which was probably a blessing in disguise for Hemsworth. Ben Affleck has been a part of some hugely successful films, both in front of and behind the camera, but he's also been responsible for the occasional box office dud, like the 2016 crime movie Live by Night. Affleck directed, wrote, and starred in Live by Night as a bootlegger turned gangster in mid-1920s New York City, with co-stars including Zoe Saldana, Sienna Miller, and Brendan Gleeson. After a limited release in December 2016 that made just over $33,000, Live by Night made its wide theatrical debut in January 2017 and was dropped from over 2,600 theaters by the end of its third weekend. It ultimately ended its theatrical run weeks later, with only $22.7 million gross against a budget of $90 million, resulting in Warner Brothers losing upwards of $75 million as a result. Reviewers mostly found it a disappointment compared to Affleck's other work. Variety wrote, "It's like seeing the ghost of a terrific movie. All the pieces are in place, yet as you're watching it, there doesn't seem to be quite enough." If you want to watch a great movie based on Mattel toys that performed well at the box office, go see Barbie. But if you want a bad time, check out Max Steel. The action figure franchise received many adaptations across film, TV, video games, and comic books, but it was its live-action foray into movie theaters that seemed to doom the potential of the franchise. Released in 2016, the film centers on Max, a teenager who fuses with an alien named Steel to become a superhero known as, you guessed it, Max Steel. The movie is one of the few films on Rotten Tomatoes with a 0% rating, with IGN calling it undoubtedly one of the most unfocused and lifeless films to appear on the silver screen this year. Other criticisms questioned making yet another superhero film during a time of the genre's oversaturation. It makes sense why the company later approached 2023's Barbie with a little more care and reverence towards their own IP. Unsurprisingly, Max Steel wasn't an attention grabber with movie audiences, grossing only $6 million at the box office, against a budget of $10 million, and it was dropped from almost 2,000 theaters after only its second weekend. 2016's Collide was a record-setting film, but for all of the wrong reasons. The action movie had the second-largest second weekend drop in box office history, getting pulled from 1,000 theaters between its first and second weekend, and then dropped from theaters entirely. By the end of its short-lived theatrical run, Collide only grossed $6.8 million, with a reported budget of $29 million. The film stars Nicholas Hoult as a money runner who agrees to a high-stakes drug theft to secure funds for his girlfriend's kidney transplant. The impressive supporting cast includes Felicity Jones, Ben Kingsley, and Anthony Hopkins. Unfortunately, the AV Club wrote that the film was unexceptional, a hodgepodge of corny voiceover, and repetitive, anticlimactic plotting. The film nearly avoided a release altogether when its distributor, Relativity Media, filed for bankruptcy in 2015. In the end, it didn't even matter, because no one saw the movie anyway. Relativity Media's bankruptcy didn't just affect Collide. The Disappointment Room was also a future box office bomb caught in the crossfire. The film was finally released in September 2016 under a new distributor, only for it to plummet at the box office. Despite having a budget of only $15 million, the film's entire theatrical run only grossed $5.7 million worldwide before leaving theaters, with over 1,500 theaters pulling it by the end of its second weekend. Theatergoers didn't miss much, led by Kate Beckinsale Hill and Mel Rado, the film centers on a family that moves into a house with a mysterious locked room that forces them to confront terrifying visions of their past. The result was another movie that earned a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. While Variety commended the efforts of Beckinsale in the lead role as a woman descending into psychosis, they were less enthused by the rest of the film, writing, "Somewhere around the 2/3 mark, however, the movie skids off the rails as the storyline becomes at once less mysterious and more illogical."
You too.
Sometimes a movie is so bad that it takes on a life of its own outside the movie theaters.
Here you go.
That's me. How much is it?
It'll be $18.
Here you go. Keep the change. Hi, doggy.
This is a rare case for Morbius, a Spider-Man villain played by Jared Leto, who was given a movie of his own, released in April of 2022. It flopped both critically and commercially, with Collider writing, "Morbius prioritizes action over substance, doing little to establish character arcs, dynamics, and backstories in favor of focusing on action sequences, fights, and flashy CGI. For most films, a disappointing box office performance and scathing reviews would be enough to let it be forgotten. However, Morbius ended up gathering a cult following online through memes, incorrectly deeming it the most financially successful movie of all time. In typical tone-deaf corporate fashion, Sony misinterpreted these jokes and decided to re-release the film in June 2022 to capitalize on its online appreciation. The film's re-release didn't go according to plan, grossing only $310,000 compared to its opening weekend numbers of $39 million. After just one weekend of its release, nearly 1,000 theaters pulled it from its rotation for good, while the rest finally stopped showing Morbius after 3 more weeks. It's no secret that Warner Brothers has struggled to capture the magic of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. 2023's The Flash might be their biggest failure in that department, as the film's release was marred by controversy surrounding its star, Ezra Miller, who played Barry Allen, aka The Flash in the movie. As a result, WB targeted the marketing towards its supporting cast, including Sasha Calle's Supergirl and Michael Keaton's reprisal of Bruce Wayne.
He's Bruce Wayne as Batman?
Not really, not so much anymore.
Unfortunately, the film had more than Ezra Miller to worry about, as reviews and online discourse surrounding it were ominous towards the future of the superhero film genre. Vulture's review was particularly dismal, claiming, "It's all a gaudy retread. Sell audiences the pain and joy they've already experienced. Ignore the present, dim the future." There was also criticism reserved for the embarrassing CGI moments, including digitally resurrecting deceased actors like Christopher Reeve, Adam West, and George Reeves. The film predictably bombed at the box office, grossing just $271 million at the end of its theatrical run, against a budget of $222 million. Despite opening in over 4,000 theaters, nearly 2,000 dropped the movie after 2 weekends. After the 4th of July weekend, The Flash rushed out of even more theaters.
It hurts. You know where it hurts? In my Okay, I know.
Audiences expecting to see the big screen collaboration between comedy king Judd Apatow and Saturday Night Live's Pete Davidson got a rude awakening after Universal pulled the film just 2 days before it was set to release. With most theaters still closed nationwide and few new releases available in the country's handful of open indoor and drive-in establishments, audiences are starved for new movie material. So it's no surprise that those who purchased tickets for Thursday night and weekend screenings of Davidson's semi-autobiographical dramedy were angry when they discovered their tickets had been refunded. News of the cancellations first came on Thursday before the movie's opening weekend, when establishments like the Warwick Drive-In in New York and Rustic Tri-View Drive-In in Rhode Island began posting their refund policies and announcing the nixed screenings. In response to faulty information circulating online prior to the movie's release, Apatow took to Twitter to try to clarify the situation. In an all-caps announcement, the Freaks and Geeks and Pineapple Express producer tweeted, "The King of Staten Island is only opening on VOD Friday. It is not opening in theaters." In response to a Twitter user who pointed out that it was scheduled to appear at their local theater, Apatow replied, "It won't be playing there. It is a mistake. It is only on VOD." So, what happened?
No one told you about VOD?
What is that?
Variety reports that the screening cancellations weren't the fault of theater owners, who were also in the dark about the move. One anonymous independent theater owner even told the outlet that there was not immediately any explanation provided about the abrupt reversal, and that the studio merely, quote, changed their mind. Insiders at the studio confirmed this to Variety, revealing that the last-minute decision to pull The King of Staten Island from theaters was the result of a major mix-up linked to Universal's controversial video-on-demand release strategy.
You make everyone around you feel crazy.
Speaking on the basis of anonymity, Universal Studio insiders confirmed to Variety that the company's original release intentions were focused exclusively on a VOD release. It was an internal misunderstanding among executives that led to the film wrongly being sold to around 100 theaters nationwide, before studio leadership had to reach out to theater owners and request they not screen the film. The move angered some, with one Twitter user sarcastically tweeting, "Real class act, Universal," in response to Apatow's tweets. An unnamed screen operator shared that disgruntled ticket holders had passed along similar sentiments to them. The source told Variety, "This caused a considerable amount of ill will with consumers who bought tickets online showing up for the Thursday 7 p.m. show." That wasn't the only misstep Universal made around the release of The King of Staten Island either. Another anonymous theater owner revealed that before Universal abruptly yanked one of its latest films from playing on the big screen, the studio negotiated questionable ticket sales terms with theaters. Reports indicate that the studio pushed for profit-sharing terms that split ticket earnings evenly with cinemas, something that's traditionally only done with major releases. In a time when theaters are being hit particularly hard due to industry-wide closures, some viewed the ask as too demanding, especially as the film, which would have mostly screened at drive-ins, would have also been available to rent at similar ticket costs online. As one independent theater owner put it, they wanted 2019 terms in 2020 conditions. This is a new landscape. The incident with The King of Staten Island isn't the only thing Universal has done lately that's made distributors angry. Following the VOD release of Trolls World Tour, NBC Universal CEO Jeff Shell implied the studio was seriously considering on-demand as a new distribution stream post-pandemic. The comment sparked a heated back and forth in the press between the studio, the popular cinema chain AMC Theaters, and the National Association of Theater Owners. At the time, Adam Aron, AMC Theaters Chair CEO, declared in a letter that the company would no longer play any Universal movies in any of our theaters in the United States, Europe, or the Middle East, putting major tentpoles like F9 in jeopardy after they were delayed to ensure a proper theatrical release. Patrick Corcoran, Vice President and CCO of the National Association of Theater Owners, also called the Comcast-owned studio out, stating, "Universal has a destructive tendency to announce decisions affecting their exhibitor partners without actually consulting with those partners." It was largely believed that things were still tense between the three entities until Variety reported that during a recent earnings call, Aaron attempted to quell the flames from their public fight earlier this year. He told the outlet, "Relations are warm with Universal. Relations with Universal have always been warm. There is nothing personal about this issue with Universal. This is just an issue about money." While things may have warmed, the response to Universal's latest move is looking more like the King of Staten Island mishap may reignite that fight.